Now with us, Pat Cardwell says he's going to pull the upset. And by the way, the June 14th 2nd District primary, 62% of the district voters reside in Virginia Beach. So this is a Virginia Beach-centric seat. Now, Pat, Randy Forbes says, look, we need to build ships, lots of ships. And also, he's been endorsed recently by a lot of people in the military brass, captain this and captain that. And he says, look, you put one of these neophytes in like yourself, you're not going to have the clout with the Department of Defense. You're not going to have the clout with the Navy. You're not sitting on any of the strategic defense committees. And he was almost chairman of one of them. And he says it's going to be, if he doesn't win, it's going to really hurt Hampton Roads. And he says, look at all the military captains and stuff that have backed him.
Well, John, I don't care if he is endorsed by Captains Kirk, Crunch, and Kangaroo. It further, demonstrates what the issues are, which is that Randy Forbes is beholden to the leadership in D.C., and included in this is all these military folks that are all in it together, and they want to keep him in place so that they can keep the status quo in place. But at the end of the day, what he talks about in terms of building a bunch of new ships and getting all these endorsements, he can't do anyway because he voted 5 times to raise the debt. And when you do that, you're at $19 trillion. And when you do that, you have an interest expense on each dollar of the budget that's spent at 6%. So 6 cents of every dollar right now is spent towards servicing that debt in interest expense. By 2020, it'll be 15%. And by 2025, it'll be 25%, which means that there won't be any money to build a ship. So let him get endorsed by who he wants. That doesn't change the problem, and that doesn't change his record.
Right, but he still is second-ranking Republican on the Armed Services Committee, right? I mean, he ran for chairman. He got beat by the gentleman from Texas, but he's second in command there. I mean, you take him out of that position, there is an argument to be made with all the jobs in Virginia dependent on defense spending, dependent on the Navy. He's got a lot of clout. I mean, do you really want to take that level of seniority out of Virginia?
Yes.
Why?
And for the reasons which I just stated, which are that we're spending ourselves into oblivion. He is completely beholden to the leadership, and he has to vote the way that they vote, which is why he voted to bail out the Transportation Trust Fund, which is why he voted to fund Obama's illegal amnesty program. These things are not to be taken lightly. And, as far as his seniority goes, there's plenty of people in the state of Virginia, including 2 U.S. senators on the other side of the aisle. They're going to be very concerned as well about how things are going to come out with respect to the Navy and how the money is spent down here. But it doesn't matter because we're not going to have the money in 5 years anyway, because when you have the entitlements and Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security and the interest expense, we're not going to be able to build anything in Oceana and Fort Eustis and Fort Story and all those places, and the planes and the ships. They're not going to be here because there's not going to be any money to support them. Excuse me.
Okay, so basically what you're saying is at the end of the day, you're discounting Forbes' seniority and what that means and how he influences jobs not only in the district but throughout northern and central Virginia.
He hasn't done anything in 15 years, so I don't know what his seniority really matters in that regard. What you should do, John, is when you redo your introductions of the candidates in this race, is you should talk about there's 2 career politicians and 1 citizen running for office. 2 career, 1 citizen. If you want Washington as usual, if you want the same old spending practices, if you're happy with the way things are, then you got 2 choices for a career politician. If you want somebody who's going to represent the people and is going to get up there and be beholden to the people and hold regular town hall meetings here in the district, throughout the district, open without pre-registration, so you can come give me an earful, then I'm your guy. And this is, and people need to understand, we have to get our handle on our debt. You know, you can say Washington, it's broken, it's time for a change. But if that change is a younger version of Randy Forbes, it doesn't change anything.
All right. We're going to open this up to your calls and your questions or your comments for Pat Cardwell. This is from Ted in Chesapeake. Ted says, term limits. I'll always support some career incumbent. Are you for term limits? Asks Ted.
I've already said that I'm going to term limit myself to 4 terms or 8 years. I do believe in term limits. I think what happens is the people in D.C., the 30-year veterans, the the 15-year veterans like Randy Forbes, they get entrenched into the Washington community, if you will, and they believe that they're bigger than all of us. That's why they vote legislation that doesn't apply to us. Constitutionally, it's an issue. I think it's hard to require it without amending the Constitution, but from a self-imposed standpoint, absolutely. I'm going to be there for 4 terms, and that's it, not a term more.
All right, I've got a text here from Harry in Virginia Beach. Harry says, if someone changes districts, does he have to start over with his seniority? Harry, the answer to that is no. Randy Forbes, if he is elected in the 2nd district, the 4th district, or if he's elected in San Diego, he maintains his seniority basis. Now, remember, technically under the law, you don't have to live in the district. And just to be fair, in the 4th district, there's 4 candidates running for that open seat. 3 of the 4 don't live in the district. Don McEachin, Jackie Gonzalez, or Sheriff Mike Wade. So the fact that he changed districts has no impact on Randy's seniority, and we thank Harry for that question. I'm going to go word for go ahead, Pat.
But you know, Randy Forbes lost this race when he abandoned his constituents and came over to the 4th. Came over to the 2nd from the 4th. That's when he lost his race. That and all of the things about his record that I've pointed out, which demonstrate that he's anything but a conservative. So, you know, for those 2 reasons, but essentially because he abandoned the people on the 4th, he lost this race day 1. It's over for him.
All right, we'll see what plays out. Okay, this is from Dennis in Norfolk. Dennis says, where does Pat stand on TPP?
I was opposed to it since the first time you and I talked, John. Well, before that, but the first time you and I talked, that was one of the questions you asked me, and I gave you the one-word answer of, you asked how would I vote, up or down, and I said no. And the reason is because giving fast-track authority to the president and our prior history of doing really bad trade deals doesn't seem to promote job growth anywhere, much less in this district.
Okay, this is Gene. I'm sorry. This is a good one, Gene. This is Gene. Gene in Chesapeake. Gene says, John, can I vote in the 2nd district even though I don't live in the 2nd district? If I can't vote in the 2nd district even though I don't live in the 2nd district, why can someone run for office in the 2nd district that doesn't live in the 2nd district?
Well, the answer is there's this thing called the Constitution, and you know,
good one, Gene.
It's a very fair point.
Gene
actually.
says
it's actually a very fair point.
Gene says I live in the 4th district near Randy. If he can run in the 2nd district, why can't I vote in the 2nd district?
Well, he can't vote either in the 2nd district. So
good one, Gene. So that's pretty funny. So look.
Kidding aside, though, the Constitution says you have to live in the state a certain amount of years, and you have to be a certain age, and beyond that, it doesn't require anything else. So, if you want to change that rule, which I think goes back to like Daniel Boone or even before that,
right?
You gotta amend the Constitution.
Okay, let's go to Jamie in Virginia Beach.
Hi, Pat. 2 questions. One is, why did Randy Forbes decide to move to the 2nd district and be endorsed by Scott Riggle, who's leaving, obviously retired, leaving the race, what have you. And number two is, in all the ads that I've seen on the TV and here on the radio and also on social media, not once has any of the candidates mentioned you. Why do you think that?
Well, to answer your first question, he abandoned his constituents in the fourth because he viewed this as an easier race because of the redistricting. The truth is, that's pretty much when he lost the race. As far as why they don't mention me, it's because I actually talk about issues, and neither one of them do. Scott Taylor never talks about issues. He just says Washington's broken and it's time for a change. He never really goes into anything substantive in terms of domestic policy or anything like that, or cutting the debt, or anything like that. So they don't want to mention me because they know that every time I get mentioned, I get votes, and that's why I was excluded from the debates, and that's why it was always done to try to keep us down. And they know that they know they have more money than me, but what they don't have is they don't have the enthusiasm, they don't have the Cardwell militia, and they're not out knocking on doors like I am. So that's why we're doing well, and they know it, and the more that they know it, the less they're going to say anything about it.
I got a text question here, actually a comment and a question from Lynn in Virginia Beach. Lynn says, please ask Pat to discuss, Pat, how would you help Congressman Dave Bratt and the Freedom Caucus if you're elected to Congress?
Well, the first thing is I would join the Freedom Caucus, and I'm sure they would have me just based upon my beliefs and my principles. So how would I help Dave Bratt? I would either get out in front and take the arrows for Dave, or vice versa, whatever those guys want. In other words, we're going to have to grassroots a lot of things. The press, the Republican cabal, the leadership of which Randy Forbes is a part of, they're not going to want us to make the changes that we want to make, like balancing the budget, like spending, I don't know, the amount of money that we actually have versus more than we actually have. So I will be right there. Another number right now, it's about 200 to 40 or something like that in the Conservative Freedom Caucus, meaning they still don't have the numbers. But the more Pat Cardwells you elect, the better that we're going to be. And remember, the first chance I'll have to help Dave Bratt and the other members of the Freedom Caucus is when, Lynn, if you'd be so kind as to vote for me on June 14th. But John, I want to bring up one point,
Sure.
Which is I think you really ought to change when you introduce the candidates in these races to two career politicians, Scott Taylor and Randy Forbes, and one citizen legislature that cares about the people of the district and not their own careers and not themselves, Pat Cardwell. And the reason I say this is that, as you know, I was going to challenge Congressman Ridgel. No, I actually did challenge Congressman Ridgel. He knew I was coming. And an hour and a half after I file my papers, he elects not to run again. Okay? What happens then?
An hour and a half?
An hour and a half.
Wow.
What happens after that? The career politicians come running in. Scott Taylor, on your show yesterday, John, and this is darn close to a quote because I was in my car and I heard it. He said, "Of course I was never going to challenge Ridgel." What does that tell you? The man with barely above a liberal voting record, a heritage score of like 46%, and Scott Taylor's not going to challenge him in a primary? What does that tell you? That tells you that he wasn't about taking care of the people in the district. It tells you he's not conservative. What it tells you about me is I was always going to be in it as a citizen legislator who cares about the people, who cares about cutting the debt, who cares about not funding things like bailouts, who cares about not funding things like illegal amnesty. It tells you that I actually care about the people and I'm not in it for a career. These two gentlemen are in it for career. Scott Taylor runs for mayor, loses, or runs for Congress, loses, then runs for mayor and loses, then runs for delegate and wins a couple times, then says, hey, everybody, I'm going to run for lieutenant governor, right? And then up till last November, then what happens? Last November, he's like, I'm raising money for lieutenant governor. I'm going to be the next lieutenant governor for Virginia. Then I come in, Ridgel goes away, and he's like, oh, wait, it's all about me, Scott Taylor. I'm now going to run for Congress. Career politicians. Nothing is going to change in Washington if Scott Taylor is elected or Randy Forbes is elected. The only way things are going to change is if people elect a citizen legislator like myself on June 14th.
Okay, this is a text comment and question from Will in Hampton. Will says, good morning, John. I called Randy Forbes' office yesterday to ask how he voted on the Puerto Rican restructure bailout and the National Defense Bill, which drastically cuts pay and benefits for our military members. His staff could not even answer the question. My guess is he voted in favor of bailing out Puerto Rico by restructuring the debt while cutting needed money from the nation's most junior-ranking military members. How would Pat Cardwell vote on those two issues? Lastly, I recommend looking into which defense contractors all the former military officers endorsing Forbes work for. Thank you, Will from Hampton. So the two questions are from Will in Hampton. How would Pat Cardwell vote on those two issues, which is the National Defense Bill and the Puerto Rican, they call it a debt restructure. I call it a bailout because let's just call it what it is. I've been calling it a bailout. Some people have corrected me. When you debt restructure to avoid bankruptcy, it's a bailout for Wall Streeters who invested in Puerto Rican bonds because they figured if the territory went down, that the U.S. taxpayer would bail them out. That's why they took the high risk, high reward bonds, and they're going to get bailed out again. Basically, if it's John Fredericks or Pat Cardwell or one of my listeners driving to work and you make a bad investment, you're screwed. You lose money. On the other hand, if you're a Wall Street elitist, you make a bad investment, no problem. Taxpayers bail your tail out. It's the new American way. That's why Bernie Sanders continues to win primaries, in my judgment. Anyway, that's my narrative on that. Now go ahead and answer the questions.
Well, I think you did a nice job of answering the question.
Thank you.
Look, the territories can't file bankruptcy under the law, so they had to either make it so they could amend the law so they could, or do something according to them. Totally with what you said. It's not just the Puerto Rican bailout that concerns me. It's the Detroits, the Sacramentos, places like that are coming next. And so where does it stop? As you know, healthcare has bailouts built into it to bail out healthcare companies. Where does it stop? Okay, this country is completely founded upon free market principles, and all we're doing with this government bailout money is taking the free market principles out of our nation, and that to me is just an abomination. So to answer your question, there's voting for bailouts just not in my nature. So Randy Forbes voted for the transportation bailout. I wouldn't have done that.
On the Puerto Rican situation, you would have voted no.
Well, to be honest, I've been out and about campaigning so hard that I haven't read it. But I can tell you that I don't like the whole concept of restructuring debt and not calling it what it is.
What about the NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act?
No, I'm all about two things: voting for what we can afford, and not basing it on some budget trick.
All right, but now wait a minute, Pat. You're saying you're not a politician, and I just asked you two questions, and you haven't answered either of them. So I'm going to press you on it. No, you didn't. Puerto Rican debt restructure. Would you hit the green button or the red button?
Well, again, I haven't read it. I'm telling you, based upon what I've heard, I would hit the red button. But again, it's not just Puerto Rico that concerns me. It's other places. This bailout mentality becomes the rule. They call it the exception. In Washington, the exception becomes the rule too much. So my concern, in addition to Puerto Rico, is towns like Detroit and Sacramento that have had significant financial problems being also put in a position where they're bailed out. So, like the car companies, like the healthcare companies have a whole built-in provision in Obamacare.
That's right.
That have a bailout for them.
That's right.
That's all wrong. I'm saying
right.
it's all wrong.
Right.
I think that is answering your question. I'm opposed to all of it. Anything that talks about favoring one bondholder over another type of individual or investor is inappropriate.
Okay, we got a text here from Warren in Virginia Beach. Warren says, John, so from what I'm gathering from what Pat Cardwell said about Forbes' seniority and standing in Congress and being a career politician, and that the senior senators will worry about the people, he's more comfortable with two Democratic career politician senators worrying about Virginia and its people than a senior Republican congressman. Isn't that in turn giving a thumbs up to Obama's agenda, as both have followed along with Obama, and also giving a thumbs up to Hillary by proxy, as she has approved of pretty much everything Obama has done as well? Thanks, Warren from Virginia Beach. I'm not sure where the question was in there, Warren.
Look.
But it's a very thought-through commentary.
Yes.
Good job.
Yeah, but bottom line is, of course, that's an over-exaggeration of what I'm trying to say. What I was trying to say to you was the way money is spent on defense, there's not, in the way the budget has been spent and the way the debt has been voted to be raised 5 times, that there's not going to be the money left to do the things that Randy Forbes wants to do. Whether he's senior or junior is going to be irrelevant for purposes of those things, as long as he continues and other career politicians continue to vote to raise the debt. So, the interest expense alone takes care of that together with entitlements. So I don't know if that answers whatever that was. Warren's
from Virginia Beach.
But,
Warren, text me back and say, because my question to you, Warren, is if the election were held today, would you vote for Randy Forbes, Scott Taylor, or Pat Cardwell?
And there's something else that needs to be said, which is how the money's spent.
Right.
You've heard me before, and others who've listened to me heard me before talk about the fact that there was a woman who had to buy her husband a $600 Kevlar vest who was fighting in Afghanistan because we didn't provide it for him. You've heard me say that we built a $43 million natural gas filling station in Afghanistan, a country with no natural gas vehicles, and that station will never be used. Okay? How we spend our money is as important as what we spend it on.
Okay, Pat, I've got a question for you as we're discussing this here. I think Donald Trump is going to get elected president. So if you're in Congress, what specifically are you going to do to support the Trump agenda, which is not exactly the Tea Party's agenda?
Well, to the extent that we have ideas that are similar or can be worked through, I'm obviously going to support him. We are in need of a Republican in the White House. We need to maintain a Republican House and Senate. It would be nice to get a veto-proof majority in the Senate. I don't know if that's
going to happen.
Probably not. But that would be great. What's, however, more important for supporting Mr. Trump if he's elected is to say we need leadership in the House that actually supports Mr. Trump. I don't believe the leadership in the House, even though they're saying it right now, is very supportive of Mr. Trump, or at least a lot of them aren't.
That's true.
Paul Ryan has this little meeting off the coast of Georgia with a bunch of other folks, and what happens, his whole agenda at that meeting is to talk about how to get rid of Trump. That's before Trump was the presumptive nominee. Now that he's the nominee, you can tell that Ryan's kicking and screaming getting there. That's just the way it is. I'm just stating it for how I see it. If people
Do you think
disagree,
Do you think Paul Ryan is an effective speaker?
I think Paul Ryan is. The jury is still out on Paul Ryan. I hope he becomes an effective speaker. I know he's got a primary challenge, but I hope he is. I'm concerned, however, that he's closer to Boehner than anybody wants to admit.
If you were in Congress this last cycle, would you have voted for Ryan for speaker?
Well, based on what I know right now, the fact that he immediately went to Boehner Pelosi 2.0, which was the Cromnibus bill, and said we were saddled with it, which is nonsense. He wasn't saddled with anything. He could have stood up to the White House. They could have not funded certain things, and they did it anyway. So if I had to vote today, no, I'm not a fan. But hopefully he'll turn it around and do the right things.
All right, Pat, you've got 30 seconds for your closing statement.
Thank you, John. First of all, as always, it's always nice to be the only candidate for second that comes in here and sits with you and takes on your questions face to face. I am, as I said, the only citizen legislator in this race. I am all about the people of the 2nd District. I'm all about the people of this country. I am not jumping from race to race just because someone doesn't run. And I'm not concerned about my own career just because someone doesn't run like Mr. Taylor and Mr. Forbes are. And they are career politicians. So your choice is very simple. Career politicians that care about themselves and advancing their own career and moving up the ladder politically in D.C., or a citizen legislator who only cares about you and is going to do things like cut the debt or work his butt off to cut the debt and do the things that are necessary. So
we're out of time. I want to thank Pat Cardwell for being with us. June 14th, be there or be square. We'll be right back.